A preventable murder, the death of Gianni Versace. This is the story of how one of the world's most famous fashion designers was murdered on the steps of his Miami mansion, despite law enforcement having multiple opportunities to catch his killer in the days leading up to the shooting. Gianni Versace became the fifth and final victim of Andrew Cunanan's 3-month killing spree on July 15, 1997, a murder that could have been stopped if a single detective had checked his paperwork, or if police had arrived 3 minutes earlier to a sandwich shop. To understand how this tragedy unfolded, we need to start with the man who built a billion-dollar empire from bold prints and safety pins. The king of fashion, Giovanni Maria Versace, known to the world as Gianni, was born December 2, 1946, in Reggio di Calabria, Italy, where his mother Francesca worked as a dressmaker. From an early age, Gianni absorbed everything about the craft, and he would later credit her as his greatest influence in shaping his vision for what fashion could become. 26 years old in 1972, Versace moved to Milan and worked as a freelance designer for several Italian labels. But he had bigger ambitions than working for someone else's vision. 6 years later, in 1978, he established Gianni Versace Spa and staged his first ready-to-wear show, opening his first boutique on Via della Spiga in Milan that same year. What set Versace apart wasn't just his designs, it was his entire philosophy about what fashion could be. Other designers focused on understated elegance, while Versace went bold with vibrant colors, curve-hugging shapes, and his signature Medusa head logo that appeared on everything from evening gowns to bath towels. In 1982, he invented something called Oraton, a super light chainmail material that became one of his most recognizable signatures and showed his willingness to experiment with unconventional materials. Versace didn't just design clothes, though. He understood something that seems obvious now, but was revolutionary then: the power of celebrity. No other designer before him had strategically placed famous faces in front rows and used them in marketing the way he did, dressing Madonna, Princess Diana, Elton John, Michael Jackson, Tina Turner, and Tupac Shakur, while also designing stage costumes for La Scala Theatre Ballet and the San Francisco Opera. In 1991, Versace orchestrated what would become one of the most legendary moments in fashion history, when he had Linda Evangelista, Cindy Crawford, Naomi Campbell, and Christy Turlington walk the runway together to George Michael's Freedom. More than a fashion show, it was a cultural event that cemented his status, and Versace is credited with inventing the entire supermodel phenomenon that defined the 1990s. By 1997, the Versace empire was worth somewhere between $807 million and $1 billion, with 130 boutiques worldwide, and expected sales to exceed $1 billion that year. He'd received the American Fashion Oscar in 1993, and the Italian government had decorated him as Commendatore della Repubblica Italiana, recognizing him as one of the nation's greatest cultural exports. Anna Wintour would later say, Gianni created a world of the most glamorous, unapologetic, sexy fashion that has ever existed. But there was another side to Versace's life that mattered just as much to him. In 1991, he fell in love with Miami Beach's South Beach and purchased a 10-room, 3-story Mediterranean-style mansion called Casa Casuarina at 1116 Ocean Drive. Talking to the Miami Herald in 1993, he explained what drew him there, saying, "The mood is very, very easy. That is special, and I don't find the mood anyplace else in the world." He lived there with Antonio D'Amico, his partner of 11 years. Miami was his haven, his escape from the fashion capitals of Milan and New York, where business never stopped demanding his attention. And that's where, on the morning of July 15th, 1997, someone took his life on the front steps. The morning of July 15th. That Tuesday morning around 8:30, Versace left Casa Casuarina for a short walk with a simple destination, the news cafe just 3/10 of a mile south at 800 Ocean Drive. Normally, he would have an assistant fetch his magazines, but that particular morning he went himself, a small decision that would cost him his life. Around 8:45, Versace returned and climbed the steps to his mansion. 2 shots rang out. Lazzaro Quintana, Versace's friend who had plans to play tennis with him that morning, heard the sounds and thought it was backfire from the lawnmower being worked on in the yard. "I run out the door and Gianni was laying there," he later recalled. "I check his artery to see if he was nothing. He was gone." 2 bullets from a .40 caliber Taurus pistol had struck Versace, once in the back of the head and once in the left cheek, killing him almost instantly. Quintana chased after the shooter until a bystander yelled that the man had a gun, and the killer pointed the weapon directly at Quintana during the pursuit before fleeing into a nearby parking garage. Gianni Versace was pronounced dead at Jackson Memorial Hospital at 9:21 a.m., 50 years old. The killer had left behind evidence that would immediately identify him. Police found a stolen red Chevrolet pickup truck in the parking garage with the door open and identification spilled on the ground. And inside were clothes and newspaper clippings about earlier murders that told a disturbing story. The name on that identification was Andrew Philip Cunanan. And here's what makes this even more shocking. He was already on the FBI's 10 most wanted list. The prince who became a killer. Andrew Cunanan was born August 31st, 1969 in National City, California, the youngest of 4 children in a family where his father, Modesto, nicknamed him the Prince and treated him exactly that way. While his siblings shared rooms, Andrew got the master bedroom with his own bathroom and a sports car, living a life of privilege that his sister Elena would later describe by saying he got everything that he needed. By all accounts, Andrew was exceptionally bright, with an IQ of 147 when tested in 3rd grade. Friends said he could memorize entire TV episodes verbatim and had memorized an encyclopedia set by age 10, reportedly becoming fluent in 7 languages through sheer intellectual capacity. The Bishop's School, an elite private prep school in La Jolla, California, accepted him for high school, where he was openly gay and well-liked, though people noted he put on airs and seemed to be performing a version of himself. UC San Diego came next, where he enrolled to study American history, but he dropped out after his freshman year when his world collapsed around him. The collapse happened in 1988 when his father, Modesto, was suspected of embezzling $100,000 and fled to the Philippines, taking the family's money and selling their house out from under them while disappearing overnight. Andrew's privileged life, the one built on his father's fraud and favoritism, evaporated in an instant. In 1989, Andrew had a violent argument with his mother over his gay lifestyle that ended with him throwing her against a wall and dislocating her shoulder, showing a capacity for violence that would later become impossible to ignore. By his 20s, Andrew worked as a high-class male escort, targeting wealthy older gay men while using the pseudonym Andrew De Silva and building elaborate false identities about wealth he didn't actually have. In 1995, he moved in with Norman Blackford, a wealthy older man who supported him financially and gave him the lifestyle he craved. But Blackford ended the relationship in 1996 after discovering Andrew's lies and tracking his excessive spending habits. By 1997, Cunanan's credit cards were maxed out and he was desperate for money. Friends described increasingly dark moods and fits of anger as he became addicted to drugs. And as he reached his mid-20s, he was losing the attractiveness that had been his currency in the world of wealthy gay men who paid for his company. But there was something else consuming him, an obsession with Gianni Versace. Whether they ever actually met remains one of the disputed facts in this case. The Versace family adamantly denies any meeting ever took place, but FBI agents believe they met at least once in San Francisco in October 1990, when Versace was in town for a San Francisco opera production. Multiple eyewitnesses reported seeing them at a nightclub called Colossus, and according to Vanity Fair journalist Maureen Orth, Versace spoke to Cunanan saying, "I know you, Lago di Como, no?" To which Cunanan replied, "Thank you for remembering, Signor Versace." Whatever the truth of that encounter, Cunanan bragged to friends about knowing Versace and seemed fixated on him as representing everything he wanted but couldn't have: wealth, fame, and a luxurious lifestyle, as an openly gay man who was celebrated rather than hidden. And that's when, in April 1997, Andrew Cunanan began killing people. The killing spree. Jeffrey Trail became the first victim on April 27, 1997, a 28-year-old former naval officer working as a propane delivery district manager in Minneapolis who was beaten to death with a claw hammer in the apartment of David Madsen, Cunanan's ex-boyfriend. Trail's body was rolled in a rug and hidden behind a sofa where his watch had stopped at 9:55 p.m., marking the moment his life ended. David Madsen, a 33-year-old Minneapolis architect, became victim number 2. Cunanan called Madsen the love of my life, even though Madsen had ended their relationship in spring 1996 after sensing something shady about him and wanting to distance himself from whatever darkness he sensed growing. What happened next is disturbing because evidence suggests that after killing Trail, Cunanan stayed in Madsen's apartment for 2 full days, with Madsen still alive, and witnesses saw them together in the elevator and walking Madsen's dog as if everything was normal. Then on May 3rd, Madsen's body was found on the east shore of Rush Lake, near Rush City, Minnesota, shot in the head and back with a .40 caliber Taurus pistol that had been stolen from Trail's home, and his only defensive wounds were on his fingers, where he'd raised his hands to protect himself from someone he'd once loved. Lee Miglin, a 72-year-old prominent real estate developer in Chicago, became victim number 3 on May 4th when Cunanan broke into his Gold Coast home. What Cunanan did to Miglin was extraordinarily brutal, tying him up, covering his face in duct tape except for his nose, beating him, stabbing him in the chest with pruning shears, slashing his throat with a hacksaw, then running over his body with Miglin's own car in an act of violence that seemed designed to destroy not just life but dignity. Cunanan took his time in that house afterward, eating a ham sandwich, shaving, resting, as if he'd just completed ordinary work instead of committing a horrific murder. Then he stole Miglin's Lexus and drove away. No prior connection was ever found between Cunanan and Miglin, making it a crime of opportunity where an elderly man simply had the misfortune of being home when a killer needed a car. But the brutality was enough that after this murder, Cunanan was added to the FBI Most Wanted list, finally putting the full resources of federal law enforcement on his trail. 5 days later, on May 9th, Cunanan killed William Reese, a 45-year-old cemetery caretaker at Finns Point National Cemetery in New Jersey, shooting him in the head with the same Taurus pistol for one simple reason. Cunanan wanted Reese's 1995 red Chevrolet pickup truck, and a man's life meant nothing compared to that need. William Reese's wife found him when he didn't return for dinner that evening. Cunanan drove that red truck south, arriving in Miami Beach on May 11th or 12th, where he checked into the Normandy Plaza Hotel about 4 miles north of Versace's mansion. $26.99 to $29 per night in cash bought him a room where he used a fake passport to register, and after about a week he changed rooms and requested an ocean view as if he was on vacation instead of running from a nationwide manhunt. Miriam Hernandez, the hotel manager, would later say he was a very good guest. You felt good with him. He spoke sweetly. I was never afraid. How can I be afraid of a person who is gentle, who treats me nice, who is educated? Describing a man who could turn off the violence and present himself as harmless when needed. Andrew Cunanan spent approximately 2 months in Miami, walking around South Beach, frequenting Twist, an upscale gay bar near Versace's villa, and living a remarkably normal existence for someone on the FBI 10 Most Wanted list. And that's the part that still haunts this case, because despite a manhunt involving over 1,000 FBI agents and 12 law enforcement agencies, despite working with the TV show America's Most Wanted, nobody caught him, even though they had multiple chances to do exactly that. The missed opportunities. July 7th, 1997, 8 days before Versace's murder, Andrew Cunanan walked into a Miami Beach pawn shop and pawned a gold coin he'd stolen from Lee Miglin. And this is where the story becomes infuriating, because what happened next represents a failure so complete that it's almost hard to believe. Cunanan used his real name, his real date of birth, his real signature, left his hotel address and room number, and left his thumbprint as required by law, essentially handing the police everything they needed to find him on a silver platter. The pawn shop submitted the paperwork to the Miami Beach police as legally required. The police had that pawn slip for 5 days before Versace was murdered, 5 full days where they could have arrested him. But nobody recognized the name Andrew Cunanan, despite him being on the FBI 10 Most Wanted Fugitives list with his face broadcast on television. The reason? Miami Beach Police Chief Richard Barreto later admitted that information was brought to us in paper forms and we had no automated way to analyze that information. If the system was electronic, it may have prevented the murder of Gianni Versace. The detective, who typically checked the pawn shop files, was on vacation that week, and the paper-based system meant that a piece of paper with a killer's name on it sat in a pile on someone's desk while that killer walked free. That failure would later prompt Miami police to computerize their pawn shop system. But for Gianni Versace, the change came too late to matter. 4 days before the murder on July 11th, there was another chance that slipped away. G. Kenneth Brown was working at a sandwich shop when Andrew Cunanan walked in, and Brown recognized him immediately from America's Most Wanted because he'd been paying attention to the news. Cunanan ordered a tuna sub for $4.12, paying with $3 silver that Brown accepted before going to the kitchen to call 911. Police told Brown to stall Cunanan and keep him there, but a co-worker who didn't know what was happening unwittingly took the money and let Cunanan leave before Brown could stop him, and police arrived 5 minutes later, having missed him by about 3 minutes. Brown later said, "I wanted to throw up. I was thinking if only they had caught him, Versace would still be alive, carrying the weight of that near miss for the rest of his life." The failures kept piling up beyond those 2 near captures. The FBI had promised to send 1,500 flyers about Cunanan to the Fort Lauderdale Gay and Lesbian Community Center. But those flyers didn't arrive until the day after Versace's murder, when they could no longer prevent anything. Many South Beach officials and gay establishments never received them at all, leaving the community that Cunanan was actively moving through completely unaware that a killer was among them. Cunanan had been frequenting Twist, that upscale gay bar where he spent time like any other patron. If flyers had been posted there, someone would have recognized him because he wasn't hiding. He was living openly in the community. And remember William Reese's stolen red pickup truck, the vehicle the FBI was specifically looking for as their best lead? Cunanan had parked it in a Miami City garage, where it sat for 1 entire month before being discovered on the same day Versace was killed, meaning the most concrete piece of evidence they had went unnoticed for weeks. The investigation remained centered in Minnesota, where the first 2 murders occurred, not in Miami, where Cunanan actually was living and spending money. No coordination existed between agencies, no communication that might have connected the dots between a man pawning coins and a wanted fugitive living in a cheap hotel. Critics later pointed to homophobia as a factor in why the manhunt seemed so ineffective, arguing that because the first 4 victims were gay men, they didn't receive the same level of law enforcement attention that straight victims might have. Only after a celebrity was murdered did the manhunt become the kind of national priority it should have been from the beginning, when Jeffrey Trail's body was found rolled in a rug in Minneapolis. Nina Jacobson, a producer on the later American Crime Story dramatization, put it plainly when she said, "Had the victims been straight, in all likelihood Cunanan would have been caught much sooner, and Versace would never have died." On July 14th, the day before Versace's murder, Cunanan checked out of the Normandy Plaza Hotel without paying for his last night, his money finally running out after 2 months of living in Miami. The next morning, he walked to 1116 Ocean Drive and waited for a fashion designer to return from buying magazines. Aftermath. News of Versace's death flashed around the world as though a king or president had been assassinated, with an Italian newspaper calling him a prince and reports referring to him as the king of couture. The fashion industry united in grief and outrage, while Versace stores closed for 1 day in his memory, marking the loss of someone who changed their entire world. But Andrew Cunanan had disappeared again into the streets of Miami. Guillermo Volpe, a sailboat owner, called police the day after Versace's murder to report that someone resembling Cunanan had broken into his boat. Investigators arrived 2 days later and then waited 6 days to collect evidence, continuing the pattern of slow response that had defined the entire manhunt. Cunanan had found another place to hide by that point, a luxury houseboat on the Indian Creek Canal about 2 to 3 miles north of Versace's mansion. The boat belonged to a man named Torsten Reineck, who was in Germany trying to sell it, and the boat had been empty since Christmas, giving Cunanan a perfect hideout where nobody would disturb him. July 23rd, 8 days after Versace's murder, a 79-year-old caretaker named Fernando Carrera was making routine rounds with his wife when they heard a gunshot coming from inside the houseboat. They called police, and a SWAT team lobbed tear gas into the houseboat, then waited 12 hours before entering because they weren't sure if Cunanan was still alive and dangerous inside. Detective George Navarro later described what they found when they finally went in, saying, "When we first entered the home, we kind of had to back out because the gas was so strong. Seemed like he'd been there for several days. I went up the staircase, and that's where we found Andrew Cunanan lying on the bed." Cunanan had shot himself in the head with the same Taurus pistol he'd stolen from Jeffrey Trail, the same weapon he'd used to kill David Madsen, William Reese, and Gianni Versace over the course of 3 months. No suicide note existed, just glasses on a table, newspapers chronicling the Versace murder that he'd apparently been reading, and a few personal belongings that told investigators nothing about why he'd done what he'd done. The autopsy revealed something that debunked one popular theory about his motive when results showed Cunanan was HIV negative, meaning whatever drove him to kill 5 people in 3 months, it wasn't the desperation of a terminal diagnosis or fear of dying from AIDS. Andrew Cunanan took his secrets to the grave. Nobody would ever know for certain why he killed Gianni Versace or what he hoped to accomplish by murdering 4 other men before him. The legacy: over 2,000 people attended Gianni Versace's funeral on July 22, 1997 at the Duomo, Milan's 14th century cathedral, while Naomi Campbell, Anna Wintour, Princess Diana, Sting, and Cher mourned alongside his family. Whitney Houston, John Bon Jovi, and Elton John performed at the service, and additional memorials were held at the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York, where the American fashion community gathered to honor one of their greatest visionaries. According to his will, 50% of the Versace empire went to his niece Allegra Versace, who inherited a stake worth approximately $500 million when she turned 18 in 2004. Santo, his brother, received 30% and became CEO, while Donatella, his sister, received 20% and became head of design, keeping the company in family hands. A planned IPO that would have valued the company at several $billion was canceled after Gianni's death, but something remarkable happened in October 1997 at the first Milan Fashion Week without him. Rival designers who'd competed with him for decades attended his show in support, with Giorgio Armani, Donna Karan, Miuccia Prada, and Karl Lagerfeld all coming to pay respect to someone who'd elevated the entire industry. Donatella would later say, "My brother was the king, and my whole world had crashed around me. Now I feel like the death of my brother made me strong," describing how tragedy forced her to step into a role she'd never imagined having to fill. In 2018, Versace was sold to Michael Kors for $2.1 billion, proving the brand's enduring value decades after its founder's death. Just this year, in 2025, Prada Group announced an acquisition for a tentative 1.25 billion euros, and Donatella continues to oversee the brand as chief brand ambassador, carrying forward her brother's vision. Casa Casuarina was transformed into a restaurant and hotel where the original walls, floors, ceilings, and windows remain as a preserved snapshot of the world Versace created for himself in Miami. The case prompted real changes in law enforcement that came too late to save anyone. Miami police computerized their pawn shop system so that a piece of paper could never again sit unnoticed, while a killer's name stared up from a desk, and the FBI improved outreach to the LGBTQ community after recognizing how isolation from that community had hampered the investigation. Law enforcement agencies began studying the case as an example of what happens when coordination fails and information doesn't flow between departments. But those changes couldn't bring back the 5 people Andrew Cunanan killed. Jeffrey Trail, beaten to death with a hammer at 28 years old. David Madsen, shot by someone who called him the love of my life, dead at 33. Lee Miglin, brutally murdered in his own garage at 72. William Reese, killed for his truck at 45. And Gianni Versace, shot on the steps of his Miami haven at 50. Conclusion: the story of Gianni Versace's murder isn't just about a serial killer or a celebrity tragedy. It's about a system that failed at multiple points to protect people when it had every opportunity to do exactly that. A pawn slip that sat in a pile of papers for 5 days, a 3-minute gap at a sandwich shop, flyers that arrived one day too late, when they might have saved a life if they'd been distributed when promised. Versace's murder was preventable, and that's what makes it so painful to look back on. If someone had checked that pawn shop paperwork, if police had arrived 3 minutes earlier, if the FBI had distributed flyers to the gay community in South Beach where Cunanan was spending his time, if the stolen truck had been found during that month it sat in a parking garage, any one of these moments could have changed everything. Andrew Cunanan spent approximately 2 months in Miami living in a $27 a night hotel, walking around South Beach, going to bars and restaurants, existing openly in a community while appearing on the FBI's 10 Most Wanted list and having his face broadcast on America's Most Wanted. And yet he moved through the city undetected until the moment he pulled the trigger on Ocean Drive, proving that sometimes the most dangerous thing isn't a criminal's skill at hiding, it's the system's failure to look. Anna Wintour said of Versace that he had enormous love for life, and that love showed in everything he created with bold colors, unapologetic glamour, and celebration of the human form that revolutionized fashion. He understood that fashion wasn't just about clothes, it was about culture, celebrity, and the power of image to transform how people saw themselves and the world. He helped create the supermodel phenomenon that defined an era, brought fashion into the entertainment world in ways that hadn't existed before, designed for operas and ballets, and built a billion-dollar empire starting from his mother's dressmaking shop in southern Italy. And on a Tuesday morning in July, while walking back from buying magazines at a cafe, all of that ended in an instant because of bureaucratic failures, lack of coordination between agencies, and 3 minutes at a sandwich shop where police almost caught a killer. The question that haunts this case isn't just who killed Gianni Versace, because we know the answer to that. The question is why nobody stopped Andrew Cunanan before he had the chance, despite having his name, his address, his thumbprint, and his face on wanted posters across the country. That's the real tragedy here, not that evil exists, but that we failed to stop it when we had every tool we needed to do exactly that.